Hi all. I'm so sorry to not be with you there this morning. I love our Sundays together, and look forward to being back with you next week. But I'm grateful for the time being that I can do this with you. And so thanks for all who put some work into this service to make it happen, and for actually showing me on screen. Although maybe you're not. Maybe no one's even showing this video. You just decided to can it. But anyways, if you are seeing this, I'm glad I can be with you in this way. I'm gonna jump right into the stories of David. That's where we've been. We've been following the stories of David in 1 Samuel in the Old Testament. We're in 1 Samuel 23 and 24. And today we're following David into the wilderness. And I want to talk with you about wilderness. Wilderness both as a literal thing, something as a place where David is finding himself and where we sometimes find ourselves. But I also want to think about wilderness as a time in our lives, a period in our lives that maybe is particularly dry and barren, a place where a time in our lives, a season in our lives, maybe we feel a little lost, feel like I don't know where I'm going. I'm a little bit afraid, maybe those kinds of things. Because I think we go through those seasons in our life. We have those seasons where we find ourselves in the wilderness. But within the larger story of David, and we're going to use David to think about that with us, because David spends a lot of time in the wilderness. If you've been following this series, as you know, David is on the run. He's running from King Saul. David has been told by the prophet Samuel, has been told by God that he will be the next king of Israel. But he's in this in-between time, this time when he has been anointed king, but he's not there yet. And so he's waiting. And meanwhile, Saul, the current king, is feeling very threatened by David. David is moving and growing as a person. Saul seems to be deteriorating as a person. And so Saul is resolute. Saul is consumed with ending David's life. He is putting all his resources into finding and getting rid of David. So David's on the run. David is in the wilderness. And at the point where we pick up this story, I mean, really, David's life is just about survival, because that's what wilderness is, right? It's the very basic level of existence. And so David's on the run. He's hiding in caves, and he has surrounded himself with this band of followers that have joined him. And it's this group that is in a similar place, right? They're just trying to survive. They're just trying to make it in life. In 1 Samuel 22, where it describes who is with David, and it says this. It says, everyone who was in distress and everyone who was in debt and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he, that is David, became captain over them. Those who were with him numbered about 400. So David's in the wilderness with this group of 400 people some of them have similarly been chased out by Saul. Others are finding themselves in wilderness experiences, wilderness seasons for different reasons. And as we read these wilderness stories, and there's lots of them, and you're feel free to read them, we find that while life is hard and life is filled with fear, there's other things emerging, and that's why I think I want to spend time. That's why I want to spend time talking about this with you. There is fear within the wilderness, and for good reason. There's reason to be scared. Saul wants to kill David and will kill David if he can. So there's reason to be fearful. And yet within this season that he's in, within the wilderness that he's in, he's finding something else. He's finding clarity. He's finding a sense of refined purpose. And I think that's something that fear can do for us as we go through life. We talk a lot about the negative side of fear for good reason, right? When we talked about the story of David and Goliath, we talked about the debilitating nature of fear, the way it paralyzes us, the way it freezes us. But there's also a certain level, there's a certain side to fear that is good. It's a natural response to situations, right? And when we are in fear mode, our senses are heightened. We tend to have a sharper clarity, a sharper alertness. There's a clarity for what's really important. It's kind of this biological response to a situation where there's this burst of energy, this burst of adrenaline, and we're given an ability that maybe we don't even have otherwise. And so we've been talking about how knowing that we are loved by God reorients our lives regardless of the situation we find ourselves in. And as David is running in the wilderness, the reorientation that's taking place in David's life is this move where his fear, living out of fear, is moving away from living out of terror to living into attentiveness. And I'll explain what I mean by that. It's like God is using this time that he's in the wilderness. It's like God is using this time to clear away the clutter, to clear away the stuff that doesn't really matter in his life, that doesn't really need to be there. And it's like God is taking that stuff away and bringing him to what really matters in life. What are the most important things that we need to prioritize and focus on and think about and work on? I think wilderness times have a tendency to do that in our lives, because we don't choose to go to the wilderness. At least I don't think we do. I think the wilderness, we usually enter into these seasons of wilderness when something not good is happening, when something bad is happening, when we're on the run like David is, or when we're just in a really dry season, or things have gone wrong, or whatever it is. It's typically not a good place. But it just seems that tends to be one of the ways that God operates. That the wilderness is often a place where God meets us in significant ways. And I think there's good reason for that. When we read other parts of the Bible, when we read in the New Testament, for instance, we hear that all the time. We hear the writers of the other parts of the Bible talk about it. In the book of James in the New Testament, he says, "Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of any kind." And in 1 Peter, I think it is, Peter says that, rejoice, even though you have to suffer for a little while, you have trials for a little while, still you can rejoice. And I think the reason they can say that is that there seems to be this way that God works, that this is what God does, that when we are in these moments, when our senses are heightened, and when we're in an alert mode and the adrenaline's running, when we're at our alertest, that's a word, it's often in those times where the things that are most important in life come to light, where God helps to bring those things to light. And that's what's happening in David's life. And we'll see it as we read these stories, or read this story. But I think it's also something that can happen in our own lives when we find ourselves in the wilderness. So like I said, the stories we're in today are in 1 Samuel 23 and 24. And I'm going to jump through a lot of stuff. So there's other things in there that you can read if you'd like to go and read them. And the reason I'm using these stories today is because I think they help us to see how clarity is gained when we do find ourselves in the wilderness, how clarity can be gained and how direction can be changed, how this reorientation can take place when we find ourselves. So the first story, it starts in 1 Samuel 23. And David's in the wilderness, and he hears through his scouts and just through word of mouth that there's a town, an Israelite town, a Jewish town, Keilah, that is under attack. It's being attacked by the Philistines. And David is conflicted because it's within his heart to help. And this is a really important thing, right? That who he is in the wilderness doesn't change. Who he is as he's on the run and as God is working in his life doesn't change. I think what God does when God reorients us is that God takes who we are, who he has made us to be, and he moves it in a direction that is healthy for us, for others, that works alongside what God is doing. So David hears that this town is under attack by the Philistines. And David's been proven to be a great warrior, a great general, and he has these men that are willing to follow him. So in his heart, he's like, I want to help, but I'm fearful that if I go there, I'm going to meet Saul, and then Saul will have me, and then everything will be down. So David does something that I think is so characteristic of him throughout this time in the wilderness, is that he goes to God and he says, and he prays. He stops and he says, what should I do? And the short story is that he does go to Keilah, and he does save them. He does save the people from the attack of the Philistines. And as he feared, Saul does hear that he's there. And so Saul comes and sends his army to Keilah to see if he can find David. But we'll talk about that more in a second. But I think what's so interesting about that for me is that whenever David is confronted with extreme danger, or whenever David's in a situation where he's not sure, what do I do in this situation, right? What's the right decision to make? All these kinds of things. The story, the Bible story, the biblical story doesn't portray him as a man of action. It portrays him as a man of prayer. And even how it's written, right? When within the story, the battles receive just one line. David came in and defeated whoever, the Philistines, whoever he defeated. But when they talk about David praying, they tend to stop. The writer tends to stop and say, and this is what David said, and this is how God responded, and this is what he decided, right? David's prayers receive more attention than David's actions do, which to me is very interesting. I think that's part of the clarity that is received there by David. He's receiving clarity that when you're in the wilderness, every action, every reaction relies on God. And often, maybe not, but often it's the lack of recognizing that we rely on God that gets us into wilderness in the first place. Maybe, anyways. But I think that's one of the pieces of clarity that he receives, and one of the pieces of clarity that we can listen to as well. When we're in the wilderness, helps us to recognize that every action, every reaction that we make in life relies on God. And for David, this is a pattern that he used through the rest of his life. Whenever he faced something, he went to prayer. It's the posture he took when he was going against enemies. It's the posture he took when he had big decisions, when he does eventually become king, when he has to make big decisions. It's the posture he took when he had small steps he needed to make. He would spend time in prayer. And not just prayer and in terms of I'm asking God, please help me defeat the Philistines. Thank you. God, please keep me safe from Saul. Thank you. Those aren't bad things. But David jumps into a posture of listening, what I want to call, or others call listening prayer. It's not just listing things off for God, but it's inquiring. It's calling out to God. And not calling on God to just help my decisions work out, but listening and wanting to hear what God has to say about this situation. And the reality of that is that takes time. That takes time. It takes a discipline. It takes a habit. It takes a posture that we carry through life to say that I recognize that the things I do rely on God leading me in them, God being part of them as I go. And prayer, I mean, we could talk about prayer for a long time, right? Prayer is always this conversation. It's almost like a dance, maybe, right? Moving together. It's you're listening and you're speaking and you're asking, and certainly you're doing those things, but you're also waiting, and you're also presenting yourself in humility to say, I offer these things up to you humbly, God. Prayer is about opening yourself up to the decisions that have to be made, and also allowing yourself to face the tensions that you find within yourself. Challenging yourself as you listen that maybe God has a different way of understanding it or looking at this, or God has a different direction he wants you to go than what you might think is the right one to go. Because here's the reality of prayer. I think we often think of, I'm going to pray so that God does what I want to do, or that God changes his mind, or does this. I'm going to bring this to God's attention. But I think the reality of prayer is more often that I am changed, we are changed, you are changed when we spend time in prayer. That it's not so much about convincing God as it is about listening, opening yourself up, and allowing God to do the work in you, right? It's a posture, it's a way of holding yourself. And I think when we walk through life like that, particularly when we're in seasons of wilderness, I think we come out of the wilderness different than we went in. Because it's in those moments that I think it helps us to see that where we're going is perhaps not the direction, or perhaps not the place where we're supposed to be going. Or what we're doing is perhaps not the thing that we're supposed to be doing. It's this time of of allowing God to reorient and change our perspective and give us a new way of looking at life. I think that certainly is true of wilderness experiences if we let it happen, if we allow it to happen. And it's certainly true of David as well. So here's how David's life, how David's story in the wilderness helps us to see that reorientation that takes place. So after Keilah, after David delivers the city, saves the city from the Philistines, and sure enough, as we said, Saul did hear he was there, and so with 3,000 men, Saul musters 3,000 men, and he comes and pursues David and his 400 men. So when he hears that Saul's coming, he runs again, and he's hiding in his cave. So Saul's trying to track him, and they're following leads, and they've got the scouts, and they're, I don't know what they all did, but they're following leads to find out where David is. And so on one particular day, they've been trying to track David through the wilderness, and it's getting late. They have to stop, and so they find themselves stopping in an area. And sure enough, of course, it's actually right in the area where David is. And David has and his men are hiding deep in a cave, though. So Saul's kind of out in an open area because he's got 3,000 guys, and David's hiding off in a cave that's nearby. So Saul's group stops, sets up camp, and Saul needs to go and rest. And Saul needs to relieve himself. He needs to take care of business. And sure enough, he sees over there, he sees a cave. And he decides that will be a great place to go and take care of my business. So here's 1 Samuel 24, verses 3 and 4. He came to the sheepfolds, that he is Saul. He came to the sheepfolds beside the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. The men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, I will give you your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as seems good to you." What an opportunity. How could you script this any better, right? What are the chances that the cave that Saul walks into alone is the cave where David and his men are hiding? And it's not lost on David's men. The Lord has given it to you. This is it. God has delivered your enemy into your hands. It's an opportunity for all of David's troubles, or his Saul troubles anyways, to go away. And there was certainly the encouragement to do it. And yet, God is doing something in David. There's a reorientation that's taking place. And so there is this sense that as the story goes on, that David starts to see Saul in a different way. And so as Saul is doing his thing, David creeps up and gets close to him as he can. But rather than ending his life, he cuts off a corner of his robe and then crawls back into the cave. And then something has but something has changed, right? And I wonder what it is. Like I would love to have been there in that moment to hear or to know what went on in David's head, right? That he crawls up and he sees Saul sitting there, and he sees Saul squatting, and he's vulnerable and helpless. And you wonder what David sees. You wonder if David saw not this madman, but if he sees a flawed human being, yet a God-created and a God-chosen human being. I mean, Saul was the first king that was chosen not by the people. He was chosen by God to lead the people. Now, Saul has chosen to reject that, so that's another part of the story. But God chose Saul at one point. And you wonder if David looks at him and says, yeah, he's not well, and he's not my friend necessarily. But he is created by God, loved by God. God chose him. He still has God-made worth in him. And so listen to David's reply after that, from verses 5 to 7. Afterward, David was stricken to the heart because he had cut off a corner of Saul's cloak, and he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to raise my hand against him, for he is the Lord's anointed." So David scolded his men severely, and did not permit them to attack Saul. Then Saul got up and left the cave and went on his way. This is a hard thing. This is a hard thing. Because you wonder, so what's the clarity that David received? Well, his men thought, well, the clarity you're receiving is I've delivered your enemy God has delivered your enemy into your hands. It's just time to end it. It's just time to end it. And the thing that makes that so difficult is that the encouragement is cloaked in religious language. And we talked a bit about this last week, right? The encouragement for David to kill Saul is cloaked in religious language. It's the Lord's will. God has given him into your hands. Which is why it is so important that if the search for clarity, if seeking direction, if seeking orientation does not start on our knees, does not start with prayer, then we can quickly use God to justify what we are doing and where we're going. Because the truth is, we don't want to be in the wilderness, right? We want to get out of it. And that's fair, because it's not a great place to be. And because we can be so quick to want to get out of the wilderness, we can try by our own might to get out of it. And we can even use God as a bit of a yes man here, right? That God would want me to take care of Saul so that I can get out of the wilderness and get on with what God wants me to do. But that's not always the case. As quick as we can be to want to get out of the wilderness, I think sometimes God uses this time. God uses the time to bring us, to give us clarity, to give us reorientation. But that means it takes patience. And that means it takes waiting. There's one author who said, hurry is the sign of an amateur. And I like that line. I think ultimately there are things sometimes that we need to endure for a bit and trust that ultimately God is working even in the midst of things. And I know how hard that is, because I even say it to myself. And I had a conversation with a friend not that long ago, right? And as a pastor, I get to spout these things and say these things, and maybe God's trying to do something in you, but I recognize how hard that can be when it actually comes time to do it. I recognize that. And yet I believe that God uses those moments, those times, to take what we might find, to take those times when we might find ourselves in fear, and to turn that fear to an attentiveness to what it is that he wants to do in our lives. And it's just simply something that we have to be patient in, trusting that ultimately God has you, that God is still doing a work in our lives. Because really for David, think back to the story of David, you think of his life, and would revenge, would that moment have solved anything? And as much as it might satisfy the moment, I don't know if it solves anything long term, if that's the way he's always viewing people. And I think maybe perhaps one of the things that happens when we're in the wilderness is that as we spend time with God in the wilderness, we start to see things as God sees them. And that includes people. We start to see events, we start to see opportunities, we start to see pathways, we start to see people the way that God sees them. And within something like this, if we take this David story and however we can make it, put ourselves in a similar situation, but if you take a moment like this, in which we're faced with a conflict, we're faced with something that creates some anxiety, some fear, whatever with us, I think we always have a choice in that moment, in those moments. We have a choice that we can dehumanize and depersonalize and even vilify a person, right? It would have been very easy for David to look at Saul and say, there's the villain, there's the guy who's trying to kill me, and he's a madman. I'm actually doing everyone, not just myself, I'm doing everyone a favor if I end his life. And that makes it easy to attack, right, when we look at someone that way. Or we have the choice to see someone as God sees them, to see their humanness, as we all have humanness, to see someone as both as God created and at the same time flawed and in the need of grace, in the need of mercy. And when we start to look at opportunities and pathways and places and things and people in particular in that way, it changes. It changes the conflict. It changes the way we approach things. It changes our course of action. So the clarity that David gained in the midst of his wilderness conflict is that his fear moved from terror to attentiveness. He recognized, as he was more attentive to what God was doing, what God was saying, and how God views things, that his own interest isn't the central driving force in this. And that his his well-being isn't connected to his ability to do everything right, or to deliver himself, or to have all the answers. No, that this was about relying on God. This was about listening and being attentive to God so as to gain God's perspective on life and on people and on events and on things. Because the wilderness is a scary place. It is a scary place. But it can be this beautiful place where we meet God in ways where we wouldn't meet God otherwise. This places where we gain clarity, where we have this refining and reorienting that takes place in our lives. And so certainly as you think about your own journey and you think about those seasons maybe that you have been in where you find yourself in wilderness, or maybe you're in one now, I would say that my prayer is that I don't pray that you'll go into wilderness. I don't pray that would happen to me. I don't pray that will happen to you. But I do pray that when you do, or when I do, or when we do, that I'll patiently allow God to do his work in me. And I pray that you'll allow God to patiently do his work in you. And if you're in that right now, I pray that you will patiently allow God to do that work. I want to end today as I ended last week. Psalm 57, the tradition is that David wrote this psalm while he was in a cave on the run from Saul. And so I want to end with this, and I just invite you to listen to it as we close this. Listen to the movement that takes place in this psalm. It's a movement. The psalm starts with words of fear and anxiety, and you'll hear that. But as it moves along, there's this beautiful clarity that seems to take place. And David talks about praising God and making music and all these wonderful, wonderful things, giving thanks. And so I pray that you'll hear this beautiful clarity that allows David to move from a terrified fear into a healthy attentiveness, focused on what really matters in life as he spends time listening and turning his eyes towards God. So to close, I'll read Psalm 57. Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge until the destroying storms pass by. I cry to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose in me, for me. He will send from heaven and save me. He will put to shame those who trample on me. God will send forth his steadfast love and his faithfulness. I lie down among lions that greedily devour human prey. Their teeth are spears and arrows, their tongues sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They set a net for my steps. My soul was bowed down. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. My heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make melody. Awake, my soul. Awake, O harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations. For your steadfast love is as high as the heavens. Your faithfulness extends to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. Amen. Thanks, friends. Again, miss being with you, but glad we can do this, and we'll see you. God bless.